Welcome back, Dolphin fans. Hit that like and subscribe if you are new to this channel. Today we're going to be discussing basically Mike McDaniel and if we should or are we going to fire him if we lose this next game or if the Bengals end up losing to the Denver Broncos tomorrow and kind of just, it is what it is for us. And there's going to be a couple points that maybe we talk about here, but for the most part, I think honestly, it's a half and half, but for me, I'm kind of leaning towards allowing him to stay as long as Chris Grier is gone. And the reason behind that is because I think Mike McDaniel, just like Tua, has learned from a lot of his mistakes. And I think this is the biggest one that, it kind of blew up in his face. It was the offensive line. And I think this year Mike McDaniel has seen that he needs a better offensive line to run this type of offense. And, each year, what you've seen is he's developed better and better each year based upon certain aspects. Like, for instance, when we first started and, we basically first got Tyreek Hill, all of that stuff happened. The run game wasn't so great. So what he ended up doing is he ended up drafting Devon Achane his second year to help that style of offense. And then what ended up happening, tight ends were a big problem. We didn't have any production from the tight ends. Jonnu Smith comes in this year. And what I think Mike McDaniel is going to see, based upon if we trade Tyreek Hill or not, I'm not sure what's happening. Maybe we don't. But I think he's starting to see that in order to run this offense, the one that he wants to do, he needs to have an offensive line. He needs to have a significantly better one. And right now, the solid pillars of this team, basically the defensive line, the linebackers, Jordan Brooks is going to stay. He's going to be a phenomenal linebacker. He's been great this year. Our corners are pretty good. We have Kendall Fuller and Jalen Ramsey. Those aren't bad. The safeties need help. But the prominent thing on this team, the next step, is the offensive line. And I think he clearly sees that, especially seeing Isaiah Wynn being put in last game and just seeing the difference, having that one player in and taking good old Liam Eichenberg out of the starting lineup. You see the difference that it makes when you have good offensive linemen. So why I would want him to stay is, depending on what happens at this next stage, Mike McDaniel has basically took us to the playoffs every single year that he's been with us. And I know it's been, less than awesome when it comes to getting into the playoffs and what we do. But again, at the end of the day, I think each year he's developed something better and better. So like I said, it was a running back the first year. He didn't have too much of a running game. And we ended up developing that. The next years were the tight ends. They weren't producing, and we ended up developing that. So now I think he understands you have all these different pieces in order to solidify Tua, because you've developed Tua. Like, let's be real. Tua was, not what he was until now because of Mike McDaniel and having that nice, awesome coaching culture behind him, which is cool. And I think also the fact that he's starting to understand he can't be so buddy-buddy with players. People that produce stay in the game and people that don't are not in the game. And he's seen that this year. So honestly, when I talk about Mike McDaniel, this all depends on what we do with Chris Grier. I think that Chris Grier has missed on a lot of players. I think him as a general manager, he's brought in players and let go of a lot of key players. And I think that just the consistent... Honestly, it just goes back to, when he laughed when we were talking about the offensive line and how it's turned out right now. I think the problem more so is Chris Grier. And I think maybe there might be some say on why Liam Eichenberg's in there. Maybe Chris Grier tells him that he needs to have Liam in there because he was a second-round draft pick. And it wasn't even Mike McDaniel's pick. If you really consider, the picks that we have, Mike McDaniel drafted Patrick Paul, and Patrick Paul looks pretty good. Honestly, if we look at the Mike McDaniel tenure, because it's not just Chris Grier drafting players, it's both of them. When you look at the drafting of players, yes, Tyndall and all that, they were kind of like, it's third-round pick, and he's choosing some of these. So when Mike McDaniel came into the fold, obviously the first year he had kind of nothing. But the next year, so when you look at the draft picks, honestly, offensively, because that's what Mike McDaniel is, he's hit on pretty decent amount. So the first year that he was in there, obviously, it's a rookie year. So he gets Izukanma, Skylar Thompson, Cameron Good, Channing Tindall. That was kind of like a wash year. It's his first year. He didn't really know what he's looking for. And Izukanma looked okay in the beginning, but he just hasn't gotten on the field. Then the next year, defensively, we can all say that Vic Fangio told them to draft Cam Smith, which he's not been that great. But then the offensive players are Devon Achane and Elijah Higgins. Elijah Higgins is playing snaps on the Cardinals team right now, and obviously Devon Achane is a stud. So Ryan Hayes, that's a 7th-round draft pick. You don't really expect those guys to do too much. And then this last year, obviously Chop Robinson is a defensive pick, but then Patrick Paul, Jalen Wright, Malik Washington. Taj Washington got injured in the beginning of the year, so we didn't get to see that. But basically, Patrick Paul, Jalen Wright, Malik Washington are all players that we have used this year, and they have turned out to look very, very good. So when you kind of consider this, it's like Chris Grier sucked, and his draft pick sucked. But since Mike McDaniel has come into the fold, think of it. Every single draft, basically, we've gotten not just okay players, but star players. Like Malik Washington is going to be a very good player for this team. Patrick Paul seems to look like a very good player for this team. Who else is it? Jalen Wright. I mean, he looks like he's going to take over for Mostert the next year. All these players that Mike McDaniel has picked up have been really good players. So there's some keys that this is why, when I made that video, I was very angry and kind of not seeing Mike McDaniel learn too much. But as this season has progressed, I've seen Mike McDaniel learn a lot about being a coach. And I think he's starting to take some of this, because we never really had a season like this where it's like your back's against the ropes type of thing. And I think Mike McDaniel is starting to learn from a lot of his mistakes that he's been doing. Here's the thing. Coaches that are rookies, they have a lot of stuff that they're trying to develop. It's very rare that you find someone that's like a Bill Belichick or any of those types of coaches that don't have mishaps coming from, whatever it is. But when you have Chris Grier as your general manager, it kind of makes it hard, because he doesn't really know, and it seems like he doesn't really know draft-wise and, free agent-wise, and just doesn't seem to know, and we don't know who the aspect of it is. But when you look at Mike McDaniel as a whole, yes, there are a lot of bad, but there's also a lot of good, and it's kind of a little bit more of the good than there is bad. The bad is obviously the offensive line was not addressed, but they drafted Patrick Paul. And that, the first couple years, Mike McDaniel seemed to not learn from what he was trying to do. He kept trying to force things. And what it seems like this year, and what it looks like when you're watching the games, is just, honestly, when we hit those good teams, the offensive line struggles. And that's what kind of throws us all off. And honestly, in a lot of those games, the defense just disappears. The Houston game was good. But a lot of these games, we could have won if the defense just showed up maybe 1 or 2 times. So when you look at Mike McDaniel as a whole, there's a lot more good than he's doing than bad. And I think, honestly, when you look at this, again, Chris Grier definitely needs to go. 100%. I don't disagree with anyone with that. I think Chris Grier has had enough time to develop, and he just hasn't. But when you look at Mike McDaniel as a whole, and even just draft-wise, when you've seen how he's come in, and every offensive player turns out to be exactly what we needed and is a star player. And like I said, the first offensive lineman that Mike McDaniel drafted seems to be a starting caliber offensive lineman. The key is that he has developed this, and he's developed a lot of players under his coaching tenure to make them good. Austin Jackson was not good with Brian Flores, but under Mike McDaniel, he's turned into a starting right tackle. And you even see just the aspect of how much he's missed on this team. So the truth about Mike McDaniel is that, honestly, I think he needs to have another year. And depending on this next year is what we get to sum Mike McDaniel up. Because if we go into this next year and Mike McDaniel addresses the offensive line, he starts getting a bunch of different offensive linemen trying to solidify this line for Tua Tagovailoa, then I will be happy. Even a lot of us talk about the big wide receiver. I think that this offseason, we all talk about it all the time. Just get that offensive line right. Get it right. And you're pretty close. Honestly, you have Austin Jackson, Isaiah Wynn signed back because clearly Isaiah Wynn makes a difference. Aaron Brewer, you have. That is a very good pickup. And then, Teron Armstead, if he doesn't take a pay cut, let Patrick Paul come in there. He looked very good. And then just figure out the left guard position and just stack depth behind all of them. Just get a bunch of depth players behind all of them just in case anything happens. And if Mike McDaniel, depending on what happens, even if we make the playoffs, whatever, if Mike McDaniel goes in this offseason and says, my priority is the offensive line, I'm all right with him. Because that's, when you look at these games, that's basically all that has been letting up in these games. Tua just doesn't have time to throw. And, yes, of course, Tua chokes a little bit, but when you're all sped up in your head and you can't set and you can't do it, you're going to start getting frantic. And that's what ends up happening in these big games because they have these pass rushers. You notice the Green Bay Packers, the Houston Texans, the Rams. The Bills don't really have that great of a pass rush this year, but all the ones that had a pass rush sped Tua up, made him jumpy, and the offense just did not work right. So like I said, I think Mike McDaniel can get another year depending on what happens, but it has to be, and I need to see that it's a clear, direct motive to address this offensive line and make it so that it's a solid top 8 offensive line in the league. And then I think all of the problems will be alleviated. But again, I also think that Chris Grier gets fired. Get him another general manager that sees these things and shows like, hey, this is, because everything else is kind of built. You need safeties, you need an offensive line. That's the basis of it. You need a little more depth behind depth D-tackle, but for the most part, you have all the pieces in place. You just need to get that offensive line right, and things are going to run smoothly, because then Tua doesn't feel like he needs to do all these different things. He can wait for plays to develop. This is what happened with Josh Allen. It's what happened with all the different quarterbacks that are playing well. They have a bunch of time. So that's why I think Mike McDaniel should stay. But let me know if you have a different idea in your head. Love to hear it down in the comments. Let me know. And like and subscribe if you're new to this channel because we make a bunch of content of Miami Dolphins and Miami Hurricanes. Love you all. Fins up. All about the U, baby. Peace.